Okay, good, good. So welcome you all. And today we are continuing our discussion on risk, risk management, and understanding that risk is a very important topic in all the field of the work, whatever we are doing about, And our primarily focus is towards information security risk, So in the previous videos, I have talked about what is risk, and I have taken ISO 31000 as a reference uh, to get a guidance on how about understanding about the all framework, so understanding what are the different principles, how the framework is designed, and we talked about the process also. So we are very well aware by now with the reference of ISO 31000 that what are the different principles, how do we design our framework, and what are the different so when we go to processes actually, and within that we talked about risk assessment, we talked about risk treatment, and while doing all that we did talked about context, we talked about scopes, we talked about criteria, we talked about communication consultation, we talked about monitoring. So this we are, so there so in fact just to highlight it, I had in the previous I had talked about ISO 31000. Now this is a risk management standard which gives a guidance which can be applied to any organization, any size, any industry. So it's not any specific for it. But when I go to the so today I'm going to highlight on the terms and definitions what we normally use in the risk management while managing the information security risk. What are the different terms? So there are a lot many terms comes to explain those terms. In fact, I am taking reference of ISO 27005. So what is ISO 27005? So if you see, ISO 31000 was risk management guidance, so this was a standard for risk management guidance, and this guidance was applicable to all the industries. So it is not for any particular specific industry and all. It can be applied to everywhere, in any size, any organization, whatever we have. And we have done some videos on it, and I think understanding of those concepts are very important before you proceed on it, because that's the place where we have tried to set the definition for risk. We have tried to understand the definition of risk from different perspective. Now we are going a little deeper towards information security, and that's where the very first standard what I am referring is ISO 27005. In fact, we'll be talking about 27001, 27002, which talks about information security management, social management system requirements. So we'll be talking about all later, but very first, as I started with the risk, I am referring to ISO 27005. Now, just to highlight you that 31000 is a risk management, which is guidance provides to all industry, all size and all. This 27005, if you see here, it is a guidance on managing information security risk. So it is a specific to information security risk. So those of the people, or like all of us, in fact, should be aware about this standard, because this is something which is giving us a guidance. This gives a good guidance, there's nothing mandatory. But when I say ISO is basically what it gives you the best way of doing something. It's like taking the best practices. So there is a process by which ISO standards are published. And that's how there are benefits attached to the standard. So I am going to make use of the standard 27005, which was released in published in 2022 only. So only in the last year it got published, like 2022. So in fact, last year we have seen the revision happening in 27002. We have seen revision happening in 27001. We have seen revision happening in 27005. So if you see, this 23rd last year has been very important, because we have seen these revisions happening. It means it is the latest. I would say that this is something very current, updated one. And you see that this 27005 is giving us a guidance on managing the information security risk. So those of us who are working in the field of information security, I would say understanding of the concept coming from 27005 can definitely give an advantage. Definitely there are other frameworks as I mentioned, like from NIST. There are other places also what we can look at, but to be very focused on this particular presentation, let's move ahead with 27005. So these all standards are coming from 27000 family, ISO 27000 family, which has got many standard, yeah. And in fact, I have started with 27005, and in this I am going to highlight what are the different terms we use while we are talking about information security risk. So there are many terms, and it is very important to have the understanding of those terms. My name is Arshad, and I welcome you to this session. Hope my previous videos are helping you in bringing some clarity on risk concepts, and we'll be developing it. And in fact, my objective is that to bring a structured way so that we can learn and we can apply in our practical work also, yeah. So let's proceed with that. So welcome. Okay. So when I say risk management and what are the different terms related to the risk, I just made a slide. Yeah, you see that there are different terms. First of all, what is a risk? Yeah, we define that risk is something like the effect of uncertainty on risk. Yeah, we said okay, what is risk appetite? The amount of risk an organization is willing to accept. Yeah, we talked about like something like risk retention. Yeah, so how do you retain the means? Basically we say that when you go for the risk treatment, there are different way by which you go. That's the risk treatment, and you can retain it, you can mitigate it. Yeah, you will have some terms like risk sharing, you will have what risk owner, you will have something. Do you have something on, like we do the risk assessment, we do the risk analysis, we do the risk acceptance. Yeah, so there are risk identification. So there are different terms what is coming, the risk evaluation is. So there are different terms what comes when we talk about the risk. So the objective of this particular session is to bring the clarity on this concepts. Yeah, concept. So what I am going to do, I am going to take each term. I am going to take each term, and I am going to explain on a high level what this means. And the primary reference for this all is coming from ISO 27005. Yeah, so this all information, most of this informations are taken from ISO 27005. You can go to the ISO website and you can very well look at those details. Yeah, those details are available on the ISO website. And of course, to get the standard, you will have to go to the normal purchase process. Yeah, so or so there are way by which we can. I took it what was available on the website. Yeah, and from there I have compiled this information for you. So what I will do, that first of all I'll give you the brief of ISO 27005, and then I will go to these terms actually. Okay, good. So very first thing, as I highlighted, that this is a standard 27005, which gives you the guidance on managing information security risk. Yeah, and if you see the name of this standard also, it is information security, cyber security, and privacy protection. Now earlier, if you, I'll show you that in the previous publications, what was the name of it. But please make a note of this change also, that this is information security, cyber security, and privacy protection. Yeah, and this was published in year 2022, and this is the guidance on managing information security risk. So guidance means it's not something which is mandatory. Yeah, it's a guidance which is coming from, yeah, where is the requirement? Requirements for information security management systems are mentioned in 27001. So if you have to implement information security management system, the requirements are there in 27001. So in 27001 there are clauses where we talk about risk management. Now understanding of 27005, this guidance where it gives the guidance on managing information security risk will definitely help us in better understanding of 27001, and also help us in better implementation towards it. Yeah, so let's, so just to highlight, please make a note of this name also, that it is not talking about only information security. It is talking about information security, it is talking about cyber security and privacy protection. And that's what you see the changes happening last year in all this standard 27001, 27002, 27005. Yeah, so information security, cyber security and privacy protection, and this is the latest standard what we have. So what is this information guidance on managing information security risk actually talks about these documents. So this document what we are talking about, ISO 27005, this is standard, it provides guidance. Yeah, that's what I said, that it is not mandatory, it's give you the guidance. Yeah, you have to apply as per your organization context and all. So this assist, so with the help of this guidance, in fact this will assist the organization in fulfilling the requirements of ISO 27001. That is what I was trying to say, that 27001, it gives you the requirement for information security management system. It gives you the requirement. Now to fulfill this requirement of it, there are clauses like where we talk about risk, and that's what it is saying. This guidance 27005 provides guidance to assist the organization to fulfill the requirement of ISO 27001 concerning action related to address information security risk. Yeah, so this guidance can be helpful in addressing the actions which are required to address the information security risk. Number one, this particular standard also talks about how do we do the risk assessment, how do we do the risk treatment, especially the information security risk assessment. So this gives the guidance also on how do we go about information security risk assessment. In the earlier session we had talked about how do we do the risk assessment, what is risk treatment. Yeah, and this is specific to information security risk assessment and treatment, and this is applicable to all organizations regardless of type, size or sector. So wherever we are, if there are risks related to information security, this is something which can be a very helpful document what we can go for. Okay, this is just to highlight you the life cycle. If you see that this is the fourth edition. Yeah, so if I look at 27005, 27, so this is the fourth edition. Yeah, so this standards have been getting revised, and it got revised. So the previous release like 27005 2018 got revised actually. So this has been now withdrawn, all this 2018, the before that it was 2011, then it was 2008, and before that we had got so the idea is that we have got first, second, third, and this is the fourth edition. Yeah, and that replaces the previous, so that was the one. Yeah, you can also see how the name had changed over the period. Now this is the place where I was trying to highlight in 27005 in the latest publication. If you see the name, it is the information security, cyber security and privacy protection, which is a guidance on managing information security risk. Now if you look at all previous editions, yeah, if you will find that this is talking about information technology security techniques, information security risk management, information security risk management, information security risk management, and it is talking about information technology security techniques. So it has changed from information technology security techniques, so it has moved to information security, cyber security and privacy protection, and it has become a guidance on managing information security risk. And even before 2000, like if you look at 2008, before that if you look at, it was like information technology guidelines for management of IT security, guidelines for management of IT security, like selection of safeguards. So these were the references. I was just trying to highlight you that cyber security is becoming very important, privacy is very important. So that's where this particular standard, which was earlier talking about information security, it is now talking about cyber security also, it is talking about privacy protection also. So that's, with that background, let's start and come to the different terms which are related to information security risk. Yeah, so if you remember on the very first slide, there was a slide where there were lots of terms actually. Yeah, so what I have done the grouping. So in fact this standard also helps us in grouping those terms, that terms related to information security risk, and similarly there will be terms related to information security risk management and all. So let's focus on these terms. Yeah, we have we are familiar with some of the terms when we were discussing about ISO 31000, but let's go on each term one by one. Yeah, it is very important to have clarity on these terms to do work, better work in the field of information security risk management. Yeah, for managing the information security related risk. Yeah, so these are the different terms what we have. Yes, so I understand that you remember the diagram where I talked about, okay, there is a context. Context is very important. All that framework, whatever we do, it is not something like one size fits all. You have to understand what is the context. Yeah, so this is the context where I say that what is the background, yeah, what are the different, what is that environment actually, yeah, so what are the internal environment, what are the external environment, that's is important. So we are going to explain each term here. What is the risk, what are the risk scenarios, yeah, owner, source, yeah, there are different terms which comes. Similarly, what is the threat, vulnerability, consequence, level of risk, control, residual risk. So these are the different terms which are very important. Let's start with this, and then there are some more terms which will come when we talk about information security risk management. Okay, so we are starting with one by one with each term, and I think this will make the things very clear. So when I was saying that context, understanding the context of the organization is very important. When I say context, it is not only the internal context or the external context. In fact, we have to look at both. Yeah, so that's the reason external context becomes very important. Now when I say external context, what does it mean? It means external environment. So you see that the key word here, it an external environment in which the organization seeks to achieve its objective. What does that mean? Like all the organizations which are established, they are established to create value for their stakeholder, but there are factors which are influencing that organization, and those factors can come from inside or outside of the organization. For example, I talked in my earlier videos also, like for example, we can look at political factors. Yeah, we can look at economical factors, we can look at social factor, we can look at technological factor, we can look at legal, environmental. So there are different factors which are coming from working from outside, which can influence in our organization. This you see in when you go for IT service management also, there are four dimensions, but there are factors which are affecting it. So understanding of the external context is very important, and that's what it is saying. External context means external environment in which the organization seeks to achieve its objective. It's not that we are working in an environment where there is no influence. There are definitely influence, and we have to recognize those influences. So what can be the example of it? Like for example, the social, cultural, political, legal, you see these examples are there. That's what I was saying, that pestle model. Like you can have a technological, you can have economical, you can have geographical, you can have cultural, you can have political, legal, regulatory. So these are the factors, yeah, and these are the key drivers and trends affecting the objectives of the organization. So everything is about achieving the organization objective. Yeah, and anything which can influence, which can affect, we have to see, and we have to see that we keep those factors, we manage them, we assess them. Yeah, and that is about risk actually. So we have to see what can go wrong, and we have to assess that, we have to put the uh, right measures by which we can keep the risk within the acceptable limit. So external context, so it is about talking about external environment. Some of the examples what we talked about here is the political, economical and all. Similarly, you have to look at the internal context. Now internal context is like, for example, I would say organization culture is something which is very important. What are the governance structure, what are the roles and responsibilities, accountability, what are the governance within that, yeah, what are the standard guidelines and models adopted by the organization. So internal context means internal environment in which the organization seeks to achieve its objective. Now every organization is different, yeah, is different in their size, in their strategy, in their risk, in their goals. Yeah, so that's the reason we cannot apply one size everywhere. Yeah, so before we apply, before we implement, it is important to understand what is the environment in which this organization is there. It means what are the external environment, what are the internal environment. For external environment, we did mention about political, economical, social, technological, legal. Similarly, when we are talking about environment, internal environment, we talked about organization's culture, we talked about strategy, yeah, we talked about vision, mission, values, yeah, what are the different standard guidelines and model adopted by the organization. And please, this clarity is very much required. Yeah, so once you have done with, yeah, we are coming with the definition for risk. So this is also one of the very important term, and in fact I had created a full video on it. How do we define risk? Yeah, there are different way by which we define. One of the definition what we take from ISO 31000 is also like effect of uncertainty on objective. Now if we have to take it from information security perspective, I will say effect of uncertainty on information security objective. Now you see here, this is how it is related. So this is when I say risk in general, if you define it is like effect of uncertainty on objective. But when I'm talking about information security, it is like effect of uncertainty on information security objective. I hope this is bringing the clarity. So we had a good discussion on risk. What is a risk? So that is the effect of uncertainty on objective. When I'm talking in the field of context of information security, that information security risk can be expressed as effect of uncertainty on information security objective. So effect of uncertainty on information security, yeah, information security objectives. Yeah, and that's, so what is the effect means is a deviation from the expected, and this deviation can be positive or negative. That's what I said. We also said that the objectives can have different aspects and categories and can be applied at different level. So if you remember, we did talked about that risk like at every level whatever we do. So we have got the strategic level, we have got program level, project level, so portfolio level. So there are different level, and also we have to understand. Yes, so we have to also say that risk, we also defined one of the definition what we had talked about, that risk is a combination of likelihood and impact. Yeah, we also talked about risk is a combination of likelihood and impact, and that's where it is saying what we say, that the risk is usually expressed in terms of risk sources, potential events, consequences, and their likelihood. I will define these terms as we progress further. So in information security, risk are usually associated with a negative effect of uncertainty. Yeah, and information security risk can be associated with the potential that threat will exploit vulnerability. Now what is the threat? So threat is something which is the potential to cause harm. Yeah, vulnerability is weakness. Yeah, weakness in the system design, implementation. And in fact in ISO 27005 they have given you a very if you go to the annex, they have given you the example of the threats, example of the vulnerability. Definitely you have to you need to find out what is applicable in your environment, but that gives you a good guidance. So what happened, there is an asset. Yeah, there is an asset which is an asset which has a value, and that's the reason we want to protect it. But this asset may have certain vulnerability, some weakness which will be exploited by the threat, and that will result into some harm, that will be result into some consequences and impact. That is all about talking about. So information security risk can be associated with potential that threats will exploit. Potential, so it's not that it is always going. So there is a like potential, there is a possibility that it will happen, there is a likelihood, there is a chances of. Yeah, that's what it is saying. Information security risk can be associated with potential that threats will exploit vulnerabilities of an information asset. What is an information asset? Now when we talk about asset again we can say are into two primary. If you look into two category, we can say one is the primary asset. One is the primary asset means something what is like information or the business process what we talked about. The another category of the asset what we call it like supporting asset. Yeah, that's where we talked about hardware, software. Yeah, to support those primary asset where we are having information or the business processes, we are definitely using those supporting assets. They also become very important. That's the reason when we do the when we do the approach. So there are different approach we can take. For we can take a event based approach, we can take asset based approach, yeah, and we will talk later when we go about it. But as of now, please understand, asset is something which is a value, yeah, to your organization, and that is what you want to protect it. Yeah, so within the asset we talked about, there can be a primary asset, yeah, there can be a primary, there can be supporting asset. In the field of, in the category of primary, you can say information or critical business processes what you have. In the supporting, you can have hardware, software and all, yeah. So that's what it is saying. Information security risk can be associated with potential, yeah, it's a potential that that it's not like, that's where the answer, that's threat is something which is means potential to cause harm, will exploit vulnerabilities of an information assets or group of information and thereby cause harm to an organization. Yeah, so we want to understand what are the different threats. That's the reason when we are doing the risk management, we try to identify first of all what are the different assets we have, what are the different threats to those assets, what are the different vulnerabilities to those, yeah, what happens when this threat exploits this vulnerability, what is the likelihood of happening, and that's the entire process what goes for doing the risk assessment actually. Yes, I hope this is bringing the clarity of risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objective, that's the definition coming. And if I'm talking about information security in the context, I can say effect of uncertainty on information security objectives. Okay, good. And from there, some of the terms just are like risk scenario. Now, when we say scenario, so we can create like event-based scenario. We can say asset-based scenario. Yeah. So it's a sequence or combination of events leading from the initial cause to the unwanted cause. And if you remember in my previous, I was also talking about that for you to identify the risk. Yeah, you can take the different approach. Yeah, you can say, okay, what are the I did more talked about generic scenarios. I talked about top down scenario. Yeah, you look at what are the organization key information, yeah, what can go wrong there. So you, and that's where you create the scenarios. So this is a very important technique you should understand about risk scenario. Maybe I'll create a video about risk scenarios and all, but this is some definitely one of the way by which you can. So it is a risk scenario is a sequence or combination of events leading from the initial cause to the unwanted cause. So for example, I can take an asset, yeah, so what can go wrong there, and accordingly what so that's where we have the event based and all. Yes. Okay, then we have got something what we call it like risk owner. Now, if there is a risk, as we mentioned that we are talking about governance also, there has to be an accountability. Yeah, and it is very important when you define the owner to it. Yeah, so person or entity with the accountability and authority to manage a risk. Please understand this is very important. A person or entity with the accountability and authority to manage a risk. Yeah, so it has to be as a part of the your risk governance, that there has to be clear roles and responsibility defined, there is a clear accountability defined, and he is the one who is authorized to take decision. So there are different terms comes when we talked about this risk owner. There can be risk owner, there can be asset owner, there can be control owner, and we have to understand, we have to need to have the clarity who is the risk owner. Yeah, and because he is the one who is going to, who has got the accountability, who has the authority to manage a risk. Yeah, so this is a person or entity with the accountability. Please understand, and this will means there is a risk governance, there is a clear organizational structure where accountability is established. Yeah, person or entity with the accountability and authority to manage a risk. So these are the terms very you have to be clear about. Yeah, so then we talked about risk source. Yeah, risk source can be one of these three types. It can be from human, it can be environmental, it can be technical. Yeah, something which is happening. Yeah, and when we talk about human risk, it can be intentional or unintentional also. So it's a very good example actually. So risk source is basically element which alone or in combination has the potential to give rise to the risk. Yeah, so like for example human related. Yeah, so there are some of the yeah, which can originate from human. Yeah, it can be intentional, it can be unintentional. And to address this risk, so it is very important that where from it is coming, and accordingly we put the control. Yeah, so there are very good examples given. If you go to your if you go to the ISO 27005, there are good examples given around it. Yes, so that's what it is talking about the risk. So when we talk about risk sources, yes, so there are different uh, sources which can come. Yes, for example, it can be uh, basically you can look at different when I was saying human, yeah, when I was saying human and environmental, yeah, what comes to your mind? Like for example, I can say uh, something what we call it like type of risk source. We talk about like it can be accidental, like fire, like for example fire, like something like seismic, for example I can say flood. Yeah, so we know that something which is coming from environmental, like for example if I say flood is something which is environmental. Yeah, something if you say uh, any system failure of any system, yeah, it is something like what will happen, it is like accidental. We have to look at what are the different sources we have. And human risk resource type can be intentional or intentional. Let's make it an example with a clear. Intentional means something which is doing intentionally. So let's take the case of the insider. Like for example, in the case of insider, what happened? There is an employee, yeah, somebody who is not aware about it. Yeah, he is not aware about it. So the whatever he is doing, it is something it unintentionally. Yeah, so and to address it, definitely you go for giving the knowledge around it, training, awareness and all. But somebody who knows it, he is not happy because of some reason, he is doing intentionally, and that's the reason we have got different types of the control. So we have to understand what are the risk source we have, and that is what we define like element which alone or in combination has the potential to give rise to the risk. So it is very important to understand what are the different risk source we have. Yeah, criteria is very important. Risk criteria. Now there are different criteria what we talked when we talk about risk. Yeah, and risk, there are criteria for risk assessment, there are criteria for risk acceptance. Now when we say criteria, risk criteria is basically term of reference against which the significance of a risk is evaluated. Now if you remember, I said that the risk is a combination of likelihood and consequence. Yeah, now, when we say criteria, that's very important, and this is what we establish when we start the risk assessment. It is very important that before we go for risk assessment, we should understand what is the context, what is the scope, yeah, what is the criteria, yeah, what is the criteria. So when I'm talking about this criteria, within the criteria, we can talk about risk assessment criteria and we can talk about risk acceptance criteria. When I say risk assessment criteria, we do talk about likelihood and consequence. Now this is the place where I can go for qualitative approach. Yeah, qualitative approach. I can go for quantitative approach. Yeah, for example, when I say likelihood, I can say something like it is a certain, it is something like it is like it is likely, it is unlikely. So something like likelihood is that what we can say. When I say consequence, you can say it is minor, it is like something like significant, it is something like so you go like consequence, like you can go minor, it is like significant. Yeah, so you can create and a scale around it. Yeah, so this is the qualitative approach what you can say. Like here you can say it is something which is like unlikely, unlikely, you can say almost certain. Yeah, something like that, you can create a scale around it. Yeah, and that's what you define and you go and calculate. So this is also your criteria defined, that when you say almost certain, unlikely and all. Yeah, and similarly you can go for quantitative also when you define that every hour and all. So there are consequences you can look in terms of the loss and all. So risk is, when we say risk is a combination of likelihood and consequence, so you can create a matrix something like that, where you can say this is your consequence on this scale, consequence on this scale, you can say on this axis you can say likelihood. Yeah, you can say something which is certain, and this is the place where you will have risk matrix. Yeah, and this is the place where you will have low, yeah, very low, high, medium. Yeah, and that's where that gives you the risk level, and you decide, okay, what is acceptable, not acceptable. So you define the criteria for risk assessment. When I'm saying criteria, it is the criteria for risk assessment, yeah, as well as a criteria for risk acceptance, criteria for risk acceptance. Yeah, and criteria for risk acceptance means what are the risks which can be accepted. So okay, all the medium and low are accepted, high is not accepted. Yeah, acceptable. So that's where you define your acceptable limit. So risk criteria, it's a very important. And who defines the risk criteria? It comes from the top management, senior management. Yeah, so the clarity has to be very there. Terms of reference against which the significance of a risk is evaluated. I hope this is bringing the clarity. Significance, importance of the risk is evaluated. Yeah, you see that, and that's what you are trying. So when you are doing the likelihood, you have to understand, yes, so there are different approaches, I said, qualitative and quantitative. Yeah, so the terms of reference against which the significance of a risk is evaluated. Risk criteria are based on organizational objectives and external context and internal context. What is the organization culture? Maybe they are a risk aggressive, risk averse, so their appetite will be different. Yeah, risk criteria can be derived from a standard, laws, policies, and other requirement also, because we have to have the compliance to that. So this is also very, very important. We have to understand, and that's the reason I said that it comes from top management and all. Yeah, criteria. So when you are doing the risk assessment, you will have the criteria. When you are doing the risk evaluation, you will have the criteria to understand on what basis it can be accepted, not accepted, and what kind of the treatment options you should go for. I hope this is bringing the clarity now. We did talked about some of the terms by now. Risk appetite. Yeah, in fact, the things I have taken each word from there. Yeah, that you can get on. So these all references are coming from ISO 27005, terms and definitions. Yeah, terms and definitions. Yeah, very good read. You can go and please refer to that. Yeah, so this is coming from risk appetite. Appetite, if you look at the word appetite, yeah, what you have the hunger for. So risk appetite is something like amount and type of risk an organization is willing to accept, to pursue or retain. Yeah, so we understand that risk and reward, if you go for, yeah, so there are risk in everything what we do, but what is acceptable? Yeah, and that's accordingly. So we need to know what my appetite is there, and accordingly I go for it. So amount and type of risk that an organization is willing to pursue or retain. Yes, okay. There is something, what is a threat. Threat is something what we said, it's something which has a potential to cause harm. Yeah, so if you look at threat, threat is a potential cause of an information security incident. It is a potential cause of an information security incident that can result in damage to a system or harm to an organization. Please remember, it is very important to have the clarity on these terms, because otherwise threat is not equal to risk actually. Yeah, so because threat is there, threat has to exploit the vulnerability, and there has to a likelihood of it, and that's define the risk actually. Yeah, so definitely these are the terms what we use. Yeah, but threat, if you say threat is the risk, no, threat is not the risk. Yeah, so threat is something what is a potential cause of an information security incident. It is a potential cause of an information security incident, and that's the, so we say that this is the asset. Yeah, so there are threats to it. I will have to identify what is the threat to it. Yeah, so this threat is going to do what? They are going to exploit the vulnerabilities, whatever the project. So they should have. So when this, and that's they have they exploit this vulnerability. But to exploit this vulnerability, first of all, there has to be a motivation for it. Yeah, they should have the capability for it, whether they have the capability for it or not. Yeah, so that's the reason we call it like, so that's based on that we can say what is the likelihood of that this threat will exploit this vulnerability. Yes, and when they exploit this vulnerability, there are going to be consequences, there are going to be impact, there are going to be consequences. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, and there is a likelihood and it is happening. That's define the risk actually. Yeah, so it is important. So threat is a potential cause of information security incident. Yes, that can result in a damage to a system or harm to an organization. So we are just getting the introduced to this terminology. In fact, if you get the access to this 27005 standard, and there are many other resources also where they have given you some generic examples which you can look from your organization perspective what is applicable. So that gives you a very good to start with. Yes, and later on definitely you can build on what is applicable in your environment, but that is a good start. So threat is a potential cause of an information security incident. Yes, and we know incident. What is an incident? Incident is unplanned interruption. Yeah, something which is a disruption is there, degradation in the service is there. Yeah, that will have impact. That's what it is saying. Potential cause of an information security incident that can result in a damage to a system or harm to an organization. Yes, vulnerability. Just now we talked about weakness of an asset or control, and this is the vulnerability what is exploited by the threat. Yeah, and within the threat there are threat actor. So weakness of an asset or control that can be exploited so that an event with a negative consequence occur. Yeah, so you develop a software, you have to do the right testing and all. Yeah, so that you don't leave any weakness there. So weakness of an asset or control. Yeah, there can be weakness of an asset or control. So the key word here is the weakness. Yeah, that can be exploited. So even if the vulnerability is there and there is no threat, what will happen? Yeah, there is no exploitation, so there is no impact happening. So idea is that a threat is there, vulnerability is there, and the threat is exploiting the vulnerability. So there is a likelihood also that it is happening, then there is an impact. Yeah, so vulnerability is actually weakness of an asset or control that can be exploited so that an event with a negative consequence, negative, so we are talking about negative consequence. What is an event? Yeah, so we are taking on a very simple word and terminology terms, and this should become the clarity. Now event, now there are always something happening. Are we concerned about all the events? So first of all we have to understand what is an event. Event is anything which is happening, change of a state actually we can say, or sometimes we can say something which was expected to happen and did not happen is also an event. Yeah, so event is basically I can say change of a state, like occurrence or change of a particular set of circumstances, occurrence or change of a particular set of circumstances. That's what I call it, like change of a state and all. Occurrence or change of a particular set of occurrence. Something which was supposed to happen did not happen is also an event. Like for example, an event can also be something that is expected which does not happen, or something that is not expected which does happen. Yes, so an event can have one or more occurrences and can have several causes and several consequence. So please be clear about these terms, because that will help you in developing good understanding around the risk management. So what is an event? Event is an occurrence or a change of a particular set of circumstances. We also said that an event can also be something that is expected which does not happen. Yeah, or something that is not expected which does happen. Yeah, that's a event. Yeah, so when we, how do we define the, so when we talk about adverse event, something which has negatively impacted, that becomes your, yeah, so single or series of unwanted or unexpected information security events that have a significant probability of compromising business information and threatening information security, and that's where threatening for confidentiality, integrity and availability. Yeah, so information security incidents. So we just now talked about events, and now we are talking about not all the events actually qualify for the incident. So those which have got the incident, yeah, adverse impact have there. Yeah, so single or series of unwanted or unexpected information security event. So something which was unwanted or unexpected that have a significant probability of compromising business operations. Yeah, and threatening information security means they are going to impact its confidentiality, it is going to impact its integrity, availability of the information. Likelihood. Now, what is the meaning of likelihood? Likelihood like chance of something happening. Yeah, you can define it in terms of like something like you can say chance of something happening. Yeah, you can say like subjectively or described using general mathematics like probability. You can define it like probability. So it is a likelihood. Likelihood you can define like probability or a frequency over a given period. Yeah, something you can define like it can be a probability. Yeah, it can be a probability or it can be or a frequency over a given time period and all. Yes, so that's what we talked about likelihood chance of happening. So there are different way by which you say likelihood, probability, frequency over a given time. Yes, consequence we just now talked about outcome of an event affecting the objective. Yeah, sometimes we find the use of the word impact and consequence while there are difference around it, but you have seen use of it, yeah, interchangeably they use it. Yeah, but consequence is the outcome of an event affecting the objective. A consequence can be a certain or uncertain and can have positive or negative direct or indirect effect on objective. Consequence can be expressed qualitatively, or just now I was talking about that you can say minor, yeah, you can say significant, you can say serious, yeah, or you can say you can even quantify it actually. Yes, any consequence can escalate through cascading and cumulative effects and all. It's very important that in isolation or the single maybe not major, but when you combine, yeah, so it is very important to look at the cascading and all effect, and also any consequence can escalate through cascading and cumulative effects. Yeah, I hope this is bringing the clarity. Yes. Okay, then we talked about level of the risk. Yeah, so level of the risk. In fact, if you see how we were explaining, so we were explaining that the risk is a combination of likelihood and consequence. So expressed in terms of, so if you see the level of risk is a significance of risk expressed in terms of the combination of consequence and likelihood. Like for example, to do the risk assessment, in fact what we do for the risk assessment, we have developed the criteria. So if I was talking about risk assessment, yeah, I was talking about risk assessment. Yeah, so we develop the risk assessment criteria, that how we are going to look at the likelihood. Yeah, what is the chances of something happening. And this is the place where we talked about, okay, this is something which is something yeah, so what is the likelihood that it will happen. Like for example, you can say it is unlikely. Yeah, it is unlikely. Yeah, you can say likely, you can say almost certain, something like that. Yeah, you can create a scale like it. Yeah, similarly on the this axis you can create consequence. Yeah, yeah, here you can say okay, minor. Yeah, you can case something like significant. Yeah, something like significant, you can say serious, and you can have a scale or level. Yeah, and this is what you create a grid like this. Yeah, you grid a matrix like it. Now if it is a minor unlikely, you can have something like low. Yeah, something which is catastrophic, something almost certain, it's a very high. Yeah, so those are the things which becomes give you the level of risk, and that's what, based on your appetite, you will say what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So what I was trying to do here, I was trying to create a risk matrix and all, where I was trying, based on this scale we are doing it. So you can follow the qualitative approach, you can follow the quantitative approach, but level of the risk. And how do we calculate the level of the risk? So in the risk assessment, there are three things what we do. So when you go for the risk assessment, within the risk assessment, if you remember, we did talk about risk identification, we talked about risk identification, we talked about risk analysis, and we talked about risk evaluation. Yeah, we talked about risk evaluation. Yeah, risk evaluation. Now risk identification is the place, is the step where you are identifying the risk. Then to find out the level of the risk, you go for the level of risk analysis. And now this is the place where you look at what is the likelihood, what is the consequence, and based on that you find out what is the level of risk. Yeah, and significance of a risk, yeah, expressed in terms of the combination of consequence and their likelihood. Very important to understand, yeah, level of risk. Yeah, then to manage this risk, what do you require? You require control. Yeah, and these controls we have already discussed about. These controls can be technical control, can be legal control, can be organizational control. So there are different, yeah, so there are different places from where we can look at, like for example ISO 27001, we have got 27002, we have got NIST, a special publication. Yeah, we have got cloud security alliance, they have cloud control metrics. So these controls are there, is a measure that maintains or modifies the risk. So what is the purpose of putting these controls? Purpose of putting this control is to bring the risk within the acceptable limit. So there is a risk, you do the risk assessment, you see that okay, this is the risk which is going beyond your acceptable limit. You need a control by which you can modify that risk. Yeah, and that's it's all about. So control is a measure that maintains and or modifies the risk. So the controls include but are not limited to any process, policy, or other conditions. Yeah, or action which maintains or modifies the risk. So the control. So we can have a preventive, detective, corrective. So there are different control. We have administrative control. We have managerial control. Yeah. So the control, it is a measure that maintains and or modifies the risk. Yeah, so that's what we use when we do the treatment. We have to look at what are the controls we can have to manage that risk and to keep this risk within the acceptable limit. Yes. Okay, there is something what happened. So when you do the risk assessment, you will find, you will get a risk, what we call it like current risk. Yeah, so that's the risk. So the risk, what you do when you do the risk assessment, you find the risk. That's the risk. That's the risk, and that is what is the current risk. Whenever you are doing the risk assessment, that is the risk, and that is the current risk. Now, if this assessment has been done before putting any control, before putting any control, yeah. So that's what you call it like inherent risk. You have not done treatment yet. Now you do the treatment. You put the control, you do the treatment. So after the treatment, what will happen? Your risk will be modified. Yes. So your risk will be modified. However, risk doesn't become zero. You again do the risk assessment, and that risk, whatever you get, is known as the residual risk. Now, residual risk is something, means it is a remaining risk. Yeah, it is the risk remaining after the application of the control. This is what it is talking about, risk remaining after risk treatment. So you had a risk, you applied the control. Now after the control, you again do the risk assessment to find out what is the risk you have now. Whatever the risk, remaining risk you have, is known as the residual risk. So please understand the difference between the inherent risk and residual risk. Now, if this residual risk is higher than your risk appetite, you will look for a better control, and that's where we talked about it's an iterative process. Yes, so risk remain, and you also whatever you do the risk assessment and all, you will never be able to identify all the risk. Yeah, so that's the reason it's an iterative process. You do the risk monitoring also. So risk remaining after risk treatment, residual risk can contain unidentified risk also. So that's what I said. And residual risk can also contain retained risk, what you have, remaining risk, whatever you have. So residual risk is the risk remaining after risk treatment. Please be clear about these terms. These are the fundamental for understanding the risk concepts. Yeah, so that's the reason I'm creating the various a separate video on it. Yeah, terms and definitions of these. Yeah, so these are the some of the terms, around 25-30 terms I have taken here. Yeah, but the idea is that these are something fundamental. Yeah, you have to keep on building it. Yeah, I'm just referring to one standard. There are many other resources also, but idea is that risk is an important topic, important skill, and you should definitely develop a good understanding around it. After this, I'll be moving to some other segments. But yes, as of now, we are discussing about, yeah, risk. Yeah, we talked about residual risk, we got introduced to the inherent risk, we talked about risk appetite. Yeah, we have also talked about risk capacity, risk tolerance in my other videos. Okay, now there are some more terms which are related to information security, risk management. And if you remember my discussion on ISO 31000, that will help us, us in understanding better here. Yeah, so let's go to these terms also which are related to information security, risk management. Now when I say ISO 27005, now this is talking about risk management. Yeah, and it is specific to information security. So definitely to have this risk management as a process, it has a good input coming from ISO 31000. Yeah, so understanding of the ISO principles, ISO 31000 principles, framework, and the process is definitely going to be helpful here. Yes, okay, so let's start this journey, and you will find those terminologies, those terms what we discussed in ISO 31000. They will be coming, some of them will be coming there. So terms related to information security, risk management. Yeah, so these are the terms what we have. We talked about risk management process. If you remember the process what we had designed something like this, we said we will have context, scope, criteria. If you remember, we had something like this block. Yeah, then we had got something like risk assessment. Yeah, and within the risk assessment we had the risk identification. Yeah, we had risk analysis, and we had risk evaluation. So this was another block. Yeah, and within this block we had got three things: risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation. Then we had got something what we had like risk treatment, and within the risk treatment we had like other options, and that's what you see here. And this is the place where we had like communication and consultation, communications and consultation. And this is the place where you had something what we call it like monitoring. Yeah, yes, and this treatment like acceptance, sharing, and retention, they were the options when we go. So in fact the understanding of 31000 definitely gives us a good. So what we are going to do is that we are going to discuss each of these terms. Yeah, risk management process, risk communication and consultation, assessment, identification. So the two bigger categories are risk assessment, risk treatment. Within the assessment we have got identification, analysis, and evaluation. Within the treatment we have got acceptance, sharing, retention. We also talked about avoidance, so that's also one of the way you can avoid it. Yeah, and communication and consultation is something very important. What is not mentioned here is the monitoring. Yeah, that's also there. Recording is also there. Yes, so I have highlighted some of the points here. Okay, let's move to each of the points. So very first thing, what is the process? Process, if you see that these are the just now we talked about communicating, consulting, establishing the context. Yeah, so it's a risk management process, is a systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices. Yes, to what? To the activities of communication and consulting. Just now we have seen in the block, we have seen that the communication and consultation was here. Communication and consultation. Let me block. Yeah, communication and consultation. That was here. Yes, establishing the context. So you have here context, scope, criteria. That's the place where we have identifying, analyzing, and evaluating. So that was the risk assessment. Yeah, that was the risk assessment. And within the risk assessment you had the risk identification. Yes, you had the risk identification. So this is the place where you had the risk identification. Yeah, you had the analysis, risk analysis, and you had the risk evaluation. Yes, so that was the risk assessment. Then you had got something like risk treatment. We had got the risk treatment here. monitoring and review. That's the monitoring and review. Yeah, you are getting. So if you have this process, these blocks, this building blocks, I would say, if it is clear to you, you can vary. So what is this risk management process? Risk management is the application of policies, procedure, and practices to the activities of what, communication and consultation, establishing the context. Yeah, so this is the process. So this entire block is what we are talking about. It is the application of the policies, procedures, and practices. Yes, to the activities of communication, consultation, monitoring, treating, and all. Yes, I hope this is clear. Now we move to the communication and consultation. We said this is something very important. Yeah, so communication and consultation, we said consultation, if you say consultation is a two-way process of informed communication, and that's where I said that you get the feedback also. Yeah, so first of all, let's define it. What's the risk communication and consultation? It is a set of continual and iterative processes, yeah, that an organization conducts, what for, to provide, share, or obtain information, and to engage in dialogue with interested parties regarding the management of risk. So it is very important to engage, yes, with the interested parties. Yeah, so you can call it like a stakeholder. Yeah, so that's, so it's managing your stakeholder. And to manage your stakeholder, it is important that you identify your stakeholders, you understand what is the power, what is the influence, what is the interest they have, and accordingly you create your stakeholder management plan and all. So here you have to have the communication and consultation, and that's, it is going to be continual, and it is going to be iterative, where you provide, you share, you obtain information, and you also engage. I also mentioned that is a part of your project management also. As a project manager, or in any project, whatever we do, communication is very important, and the project manager spends a large amount of his time in communicating with the stakeholder. Yeah, and that's very important. So information can, so that's where consultation is a two-way process of informed communication. Yeah, consultation, when you say two-way process, so this is the place where you are getting the feedback also, is a two-way process of informed communication, yeah, between an organization and its interested party on an issue prior to making a decision, yeah, or determining a direction on that issue. So you see, on an issue prior to making a decision. Yeah, so prior to making a decision, you have the communication and consultation. You are not saying that so that's where it is saying it is an input to decision making, not joint decision. You are not taking a doing a joint decision making, no. Yeah, it is an input to decision making. Yeah, so consultation is a process which impacts on a decision through influence rather than power. Yeah, it is an input to decision making, please understand, not joint decision making. Yeah, communication and consultation, and we have talked about it in the ISO 21000 also in my previous video. Yeah, so consultation and communication is a very important. Then we go for the risk assessment, and risk assessment is basically overall process of risk identification, analysis, and evaluation. You identify the risk. How do you identify the risk? There are different ways. You can go for asset based approach, you can go event based approach. Yeah, and there are, you create the scenarios accordingly. Yeah, and you go and then you analyze, where you find out the level of the risk. In fact, one of the term was the level of the risk. Yeah, we are talking about risk in scenarios also, which then you evaluate, you, and when you are doing the analysis, you look at the criteria. So you remember that risk assessment criteria for the likelihood and the consequence that comes there. Evaluation, like when you have to evaluate, so what is the risk acceptance criteria, that so the criteria comes into the action there. So this is the risk assessment is something like it's the overall process of identification, analysis, and evaluation. So within that we have the risk identification. It is the process of finding, recognizing, and describing risk. Risk identification involves the identification of risk sources, yeah, where, yeah, what are the events, their causes, and their potential consequences. Yes, and there you can look at historical data, you can look at expert opinion, you can look at interested party needs and all. Yeah, so you identify the risk. And what is the risk? something what can go wrong, the effect of uncertainty on objective, the combination of likelihood and the, so there are different way what you can explain. So something, yeah, so every organization has an objective to achieve, yeah. So you see what can go wrong there, you have to assess that, you have to manage it so that you keep your risk within the acceptable limit and you achieve your mission and objective. That's the place. If you remember, one of the principle of the risk management we had talked earlier, in fact all the principle, the fundamental was, the purpose of risk management was to create and protect the value. It was not just about protecting, it was also creating about the value. So these are the principles we had talked about. So risk identity, it's important. You can manage a risk only when you have identified it. So identification is very important. I also mentioned earlier that identification, whatever you do, yeah, you can never say that, oh, I have identified all the risk. Yeah, you definitely put, if you follow the good best practices, you will be able to find it. But this risk is dynamic, it's not static. Yeah, so risk can change. Yeah, so that's the reason you should have the risk monitoring also. Yeah, and so that anything which is coming you can identify. So it's going to be an iterative process. Yeah, from the monitoring also the feed comes to risk identification. It is a process of finding, recognizing and describing risk. Now that you have identified the risk, it is important to find out the level of the risk. Yeah, it is important to determine the level of the risk. Yeah, and you remember that to find out the level of the risk, we need to find out what is the likelihood, what is the consequence, and then you can, and for doing that you can go by qualitative, you can go by quantitative method. And you, if you see that matrix what I was drawing, yeah, it's a process to comprehend the nature of the risk and to determine the level of risk. Yeah, so risk analysis provides the basis for risk evaluation, and this becomes now the basis for risk evaluation and decisions about risk treatment. Risk analysis includes risk estimation. So sometimes a very simple question like this can happen, can be asked also, like process to comprehend the risk analysis is what? It is a process to comprehend the nature of the risk and determine the level of the risk. Yes, and it provides the basis for risk evaluation. Yeah, so basis for risk evaluation is coming from where? Risk analysis. Yes, and decision about risk treatment, and it includes the risk estimation. We talked about risk evaluation, and evaluation you compare, you do what? You compare the results of risk analysis with risk criteria. Yes, and that's what you say to determine whether the risk or risk and or its significance is acceptable or tolerable. Yeah, you remember that when I was talking about the risk criteria, we talked about risk assessment criteria, we talked about risk acceptance criteria. Now for risk assessment, I did mention about consequence, likelihood, the criteria is related to that. Similarly for acceptance, you can define what is the criteria. Yeah, what is the risk which is acceptable, not acceptable. Yeah, so their risk appetite and all terms came there. Yeah, acceptable, tolerable and all. So risk evaluation is a process of comparing the result of risk analysis. Now that you have identified the risk, yeah, you have done the analysis and there you have find out the level of the risk. Now that you are going to compare the result of risk analysis with risk criteria to determine, so you should have the criteria which should be there present. Yeah, and this risk criteria which set at the beginning, it's not that it is going to be always constant, it can change with the time also, but yes, there has to be criteria to start with. Yeah, so process of comparing the result of risk analysis with risk criteria to determine whether the risk and or its significance is acceptable or tolerable. Risk evaluation assists in the decision about risk treatment. I hope the flow is now becoming clear. So we talked about risk assessment, where we talked about risk identification, risk analysis and risk evaluation. Then we go for the risk treatment. Yeah, so now the process to modify the risk. Process to modify the risk means we are going to put the control. Yeah, so basically by which we try to keep, what is the purpose of modifying the risk? Purpose of modifying the risk is to keep the risk within the acceptable. Yeah, so risk in order to pursue an opportunity. So basically what happened? Yeah, so this is the place. So those elements based on which the risk is actually there, you try to play with that. So you remove the risk source. So risk in order to pursue an opportunity. So how do you treatment? Removing the risk source. Yeah, changing the likelihood. Yeah, changing the consequences. Yes, so if you are changing the likelihood, if you are changing the consequences, do you think that there will be impact on the risk? Yes, yeah, that's sharing the risk with other party. That's the another treatment. So you can have, yes, so you can go for, you can put the where you can change the likelihood, you can change the consequence, you can share the risk with the another party, and this is the place where you can do the insurance, you can do the like outsourcing and all, and retaining the risk by informed decision. You see that the risk is within the acceptable limit, you retain it. Yeah, so these are the different treatment options what you go for. Information security risk treatment does not include taking or increasing risk in order to pursue an opportunity, but yeah, for the yeah, risk treatment that deal with negative consequences, sometimes referred to as risk mitigation, risk elimination, risk prevention, risk reduction. So there are different terms by which they use it. Yeah, you have to understand the context. That's the reason it is highlighted here. Risk treatment that deal with negative consequences are sometimes referred as risk mitigation. So normally mitigation is to mitigate. So treatment, within the treatment we can have an option like I can accept it, yeah, I can avoid it, I can mitigate it, yeah, or I can transfer it. Now this is what it is saying, mitigate. Yeah, this can be used by different terms like like mitigation, risk elimination and all. Yeah, different terms they use it. Yeah, acceptance is something like you have accepted, understanding that the risk is within the acceptable limit. Avoid means you are deciding that you are not going on that path. Mitigation means your risk is within the acceptable limit, and you need to put some control to modify that risk. Yeah, and there you also see that the cost has to be cost, the control cost has to be cost effective. And then you look at the transfer option where you can buy the insurance, you can go for outsourcing. So these are the options what you can go for. Then the risk assessment, it is the informed decision, it is an informed decision to take a particular risk. It's a different from risk ignorance. Yeah, please understand, risk ignorance is not an option. Yeah, ignore is not an option. Yeah, acceptance, that it is an informed decision. You have decided, you have done the risk assessment. Now that you know that the risk is within the acceptable limit, and you have decided that I am going to accept it. Informed decision to pick. It's an informed, it's not an you are not ignorant about, so it's not equal to ignoring. Yeah, it's an informed decision to take a particular risk. Yeah, risk acceptance can occur without risk treatment or during the process of risk treatment. Accepted risks are subject to monitoring and review. It is not this is very important also, that like when the risk is accepted, should we delete it, should we forget about it? No, risk can change, and that's what it is saying, that accepted risks are subject to monitoring and review. Even if the risk is low, it is accepted, we have to keep on monitoring. Yeah, we have to, risk can change. Yeah, yeah, so accepted, even your criteria can change actually. Yeah, so idea is that we have to monitor it. Accepted risks are subject to monitoring and review. Okay, risk sharing means you buy the insurance, you share it. Yeah, form of risk treatment. It's a form of risk treatment involving the aggregate distribution of risk with other parties. It's like legal or regulatory requirement can limit profit. Yeah, risk sharing can be carried out through insurance. Yeah, that's what, in a form of contract. Yes, risk transfer is a form of risk sharing and all. Yes, so there are different terms what we use. Please be familiar about it. Idea is that if you understand the concept, yeah, whatever the terminology they use, it becomes, yeah, retention. Retention is what? Temporary acceptance of the potential benefit of gain or burden or loss from a particular risk. Retention can be restricted to a certain period of time. The level of risk retained can depend on risk criteria. Risk retention includes the acceptance of residual risk. Has replaced retention can be restricted to a certain period of time. Yeah. So basically risk retention is like temporary acceptance of the potential benefit. Yeah, temporary acceptance from a particular. Retention can be restricted to a certain period of time and all. Level of risk retained can depend on risk criteria. Yes, and with that we complete our discussion about terms and definitions, uh, which is coming from ISO 27005. I found it very useful, and we discussed about ISO 27005 terms and definitions. There are around 27 terms what we discuss it. Very important here to have the clarity on it. And in fact, when we talk about risk management going forward, yeah, in terms of how do we go to the detail of risk assessment and risk treatment, the understanding of threat, understanding of the likelihood, vulnerability, asset, yeah, risk source, yeah, are very going to be useful. What is the event? What is the incident? Yes, what is the likelihood? What are the different skills around it? What are the criteria? They are going to be very important. So what have we done till now? Yeah, so we have done some of the sessions earlier where we talked about what is risk, and to make the risk very clear, I went through the ISO 21000 where I said that this is a risk management and it's the guideline. Yeah, and that's where we got to know about what are the different principles. Yeah, what are the, so within 31000 we talked about principles, we talked about framework, yeah, and we also talked about process. Yeah, that was the introduction. Yeah, so and before that we had talked about risk actually. Yeah, now today we are talked about, now that we are getting into the information security, yeah, and that's where I said that first of all let's do about what are the guidance around managing the information security risk. And for that I found that this can be a very useful document. ISO 27005 can be a good reference. There are other references like NIST. I definitely plan that I'll be talking about NIST, a special publication, risk management framework. I'll be talking about the controls also which are coming from NIST special publication 853. But yes, let's go step by step. So I hope with this session the understanding on risk and risk related terms are becoming clear. Yeah, and now that we will go for discussion on ISO 27001. Yes, information security management system. Yeah, these discussions will definitely help us. Please let me know your feedback, and if you see if you the only of the objective of doing all this session is to share my knowledge, and in the process I do learn, and I also share my learning whatever I am doing it. Yeah, this is about knowledge sharing and helping each other in our growth and to have a better understanding around it. Yeah, this series will continue. I would request for your feedback. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you.